Hi, everybody. This is Professor Giordano. I want to welcome you to week 4 of our course. I realize that you haven't heard my voice yet, so I just want to introduce myself formally to you this way. I know I've introduced you over email and in our weekly course introductions. So hello, and I hope everybody is doing well as we have finished 3 weeks of the class. I thought it would be a good time to do a screen capture video like this because I want to talk about the comparison and contrast essay and how to really think about doing that. Now, you might be saying, well, why am I saying an essay? Basically, everything we write in the course, whether it's in a discussion group or in your journal or a formal paper, are all formal pieces of academic writing. They're all college-level critical thinking essays, whether they're very short or not. So I just want to make sure we get off on the right foot with the comparison and contrast essay. So I have some ideas for you. Before we look at that, I just want to go over the week quickly. The reading this week in Gompertz is Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. I have a thought about reading versus the videos. I think if you think of yourself more as a visual learner, I would watch the videos first and then read the chapters. If you like to kind of take information in through text, and that will help you get a basic grasp of the concepts, then read the book first and then watch the videos. It's really up to you, and I would try both ways and see which way feels more comfortable for you. There are also a couple of short readings by Matisse, the painter Matisse, and Apollinaire, who wrote about art in the 19th century and the early 20th century. So there's some very short readings, but I think they're significant in the way they really talk about what painters were after in their work. Then there's The Shock of the New, which is narrated by art critic Robert Hughes. It was a 1980 series, a video series that came out that was very popular at the time. It was produced by BBC, and it was a really great way to kind of spell out the problems of modern art for a public that was often perplexed by abstraction and some of the more daring experiments of modernism. So please watch just the first 27 minutes of that. It's a great video about setting the stage for the kinds of historical change that took place right around the turn of the 20th century. And I think what's especially interesting about it is that it really helps us understand how technology advanced our thinking in the early 20th century, but how the reaction to that was an interest on the part of artists in looking away from, say, technological progress and looking back toward things like what was considered or called primitive art or tribal art from places where European countries had colonies, such as Africa, and as we know in the case of Gauguin in the South Pacific in Tahiti. So really look at that and look at the tension between technology and a return to what might be considered something much more basic, like the kind of sensuality that African art evoked. Okay, we also have the discussion board, which is the comparison and the contrast discussion, as well as a quiz this week. So here we have the two slide lectures broken out over 2 lectures. Those are narrated by MCCC history professor. That's my dog. Virginia Rose. So listen to Professor Rose's videos and then watch the first 27 minutes of The Shock of the New. Here are the 2 readings, and then here's the discussion board. I've also put a video in here that I found online that I thought did a really good job breaking down the compare and the contrast essay. More on that in just a second. Here is the week 4 quiz. And then here are some optional things that you might want to look at. This one comes from Khan Academy, and it's a good way to sort of think about Demoiselle d'Avignon, which is the famous Picasso painting that's discussed this week. And then here's another one on the idea of synthetic cubism. So back to the compare and contrast essay. So this is a really nice 4.5-minute essay that breaks down how to think about comparing and contrasting. Basically, what this is just very typical college-level analysis where you break down ideas so that we see them in their component parts, and then we bring kind of interpretation to them. Okay? So I'm not going to go through watching this with you. I want you to watch that yourself. But what I do want to do is just take you through some notes here. The short video talks about 2 ways to think about the comparison and contrast piece of writing, that is, right? One is a block method, and it talks about 2 different types of block methods, and the other is a point-by-point method, which we'll talk about, and this is actually the one I want you to focus on. But I do want to point out the other one first, and then get to the point-by-point method. So the most basic way that you could go about doing a comparison and contrast piece of writing would be to develop a thesis, an introduction and a thesis, very brief, right? And then followed by a paragraph that talks about the similarities, all the similarities between both of the artworks, right? So what we're doing here in a comparison and contrast is taking 2 artworks and we're trying to figure out what's alike about them and what's different. So this would be a way, this one has 2 central body paragraphs, and you would talk about both artworks in one, and in one paragraph you would talk about why they're similar, in the second paragraph you would talk about both artworks again and talk about why they're different, and then you would share with us your conclusions about that. Okay? So that's about as straightforward as it gets. The second type of block comparison and contrast essay would be called a subject-to-subject essay. Now this one's kind of tough, and I don't really recommend it. But it's the one where you would discuss all the features of one artwork. You would say what we might think about as important in those works, right? And then, by point of comparison, when you move on to the second artwork, right, then you'd start to talk about the attributes of that artwork. And by how the way that one is relative to the other, we understand the differences or why they're different or why they're similar. But again, I don't really recommend this method because I think it limits us to sort of having to put together conceptually why they're similar or why they're different. Okay, let's move on to the point-by-point method, which is, I think, the most interesting way to go about a comparison and contrast essay. So what we're going to do here is, let's look at the diagram, right? You develop your introduction and your thesis, and then what you do is you break your essay down into the points that you're going to talk about. So let's say in this particular essay, we're going to talk about the way that 2 different artists in 2 different artworks talk about the use of color. Then we're also going to look at the way those same artists and those same artworks decide on the subject matter that they choose. And then we're also going to look at the way, say, they depict realism. How realistic are the objects that they depict in a particular artwork? So after you do your introduction and your thesis, you go on and you say, okay, I'm going to talk just about color, right? And I'm going to talk about the way one artist uses color, and then I'm going to talk about the way another artist uses color. Then I'm going to move on, and I'm going to say, I'm going to talk just about subject matter. Talk about the way one of the artworks deals with subject matter, and then the way the second artwork deals with subject matter. Then I'm going to move on, and I'm going to talk about realism. I'll talk about one artwork, and then I'm talking about the other. So the comparison and contrast happens, it's linked directly to that particular point you're making, And then make sure that that point is discussed between each of the two artworks in each of these body paragraphs. And then, of course, you write your conclusion. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that helps you think about how to go about the discussion board this week. Let's see. I think just overall what I'd like to say is that college writing is always challenging, and at the same time, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. So let's try to make sure that everything that's written, whether it's a journal entry, a discussion board, or a paper, has a formal tone and feels as if you are really sharing your ideas with your audience. Okay? I think sometimes when we think about discussion, we say, "Oh, well, that's informal because it's a discussion board." But really, these discussion boards should have as serious a tone as a formal paper. The first week when you just did your introductions, that was very laid back. Now we're getting into the more serious writing, and I'd like you to really think about this in a very serious way. So as always, please do not hesitate to email me if you have any questions about the subject matter. I also want to say to you, as you've done these short quizzes, the quizzes are only out of 5 points. So it's easy to miss one question, say, and then your grade is affected by that one question. I don't want you to worry too much about these early grades in the class, because they really are we're just really warming up. And I tend to grade more holistically, even though I look at all the averages across the semester. I look at your progress through the semester. So I don't want anyone to get hung up on grades. Do your best and really try to process what the video lectures are talking about. Sometimes you have to go back and review a couple of sections. It's always good to process it, right? You watch it, you process it, you think over a couple of days, and then you go back again. You really do have to watch all the videos, and you do have to do the reading, I think, to really get a sense of the particular topic for the week, and in order to be able to address the kind of writing that we do in the course. So again, don't hesitate to get in touch. I hope this was helpful, and good luck with this week's work.